Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us again. The Arizona MEP is very happy to present another workshop, supply chain related. Reshoring, is it right for your company? Something that's been a hot topic for the last couple of years, actually, with the tariffs and now with COVID related issues. So we're happy to bring, again, Seema Full and Lynn Borick from For Optics today. Before we get started, I'd like to go through a few things related to the MEP, just tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do. Our mission is simply put to make every Arizona manufacturer the most successful business it can be. And you can see our team here below of client advisors and support. This team covers the entire state. So no matter if you're located up in Page, Arizona or down in Yuma, we can help you. We are a partially federally funded program under NIST and the Department of Commerce, but in Arizona, we are housed under the Arizona Commerce Authority. So they hold our grant. We work with our colleagues there to bring a series of services, whether it's expansion or business attraction, and then the tactical business support that we can help with. You can see there's a MEP in all 50 states and in Puerto Rico. We all serve the same purpose in our respective states, but we also work together as a network. So for example, if a company in Arizona is trying to source something and we don't have it locally, we can reach out to our network and see if there's manufacturers somewhere else in the United States that can help. So it's a great partnership, a great network that we can bring to our small and mid-sized manufacturers in the state and give them a little more leverage and power than they might have in their own networks. And so the main purpose for us is to help, again, small and mid-sized manufacturers be more successful. And the way we're measured is by NIST through surveys, impact surveys that are provided our clients after we work a project with them. And then they roll up all of these metrics, and these are the results from last year. So basically almost 115,000 jobs created, 15.7 billion new and retained sales for our clients wide, 1.5 billion in cost savings, and 4.5 billion in new client investments. So these are the total impacts of the entire MEP network across the country. Some of the biggest challenges when asked of our clients are cost reduction. So a big offering that we do and a big way we support our clients is through cost reductions, whether it's lean implementation, shipping savings, just doing things better and more efficiently, employee recruitment, and sometimes that's probably number one in Arizona over the last couple of years. Our clients ask us to help them recruit, retain, do whatever they can to build their team, and we can do that. And then growth, of course, sales growth, everybody or most are interested in that, and product development. The Net Promoter Score, probably the most important question to us on the survey that goes out is how are we to work with, and would you recommend us to your other manufacturing colleagues and contacts? And nationwide, that score is an 85. We typically get in the low to mid 90s here in Arizona. We're very proud of that, and we're very proud of our relationships that we have with our clients. So here's some of the areas that we help operationally, tactically. Continuous improvement, lean, as I mentioned. We do lean training, we do implementation, staffing, ISO certifications, inventory optimization. We can help with shipping services, cost savings. So for example, a lot of smaller manufacturers don't have the purchasing leverage to get the good rates from the carriers that the big companies do. We work with a consortium who can help pool all those smaller and mid-sized companies and get excellent rates for our clients. And then you can see some of the other things, technology, planning roadmaps, sourcing, things like that. And then at a higher level, on the business side, we help with giving direction and engaging for R&D tax credits. Utility tax exemption, something we've worked with a lot of clients with. If you're not aware, manufacturers in Arizona can be exempt from their utility taxes. So for example, on your SRP bill, your APS bill, your Southwest gas bill, if you're paying state taxes on those bills, and you can see it by just looking, you can be exempt from that, and you could potentially get a refund for up to 48 months. So in some cases, that's tens of thousands of dollars, depending on the size of your operation. And then you can see some of the other areas of business that we can help in, HR support, whether it's outsourcing HR, and then supply chain, which is why we're here today. Just one other thing of note, if you haven't seen the CARES Act, we were able to get additional funding from the CARES Act, and we are using that to help subsidize some of those services that I've just shown you. So if you're in need of any of the help in any of these areas, please do reach out to our website, reach out to us, reach out to your advisor if you know who that is, and apply for the grant. The grant takes about probably 5 to 10 minutes to apply. If you are accepted, then there will be an additional assessment, which probably takes another 15, 20 minutes. And then you can actually have some of these services that we provide subsidized from 30 to up to maybe 70% of the cost. So it's another way we're trying to help our local manufacturers get through the trying times that we have right now. And finally, as we go through this, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A section. I'll monitor those. And at the end, we'll go through a Q&A with Seema and Lynn and answer all the questions that you might have. So with that, I'll turn it over to Seema and let her share her screen.
All right. Thank you very much. You're going to have to make me the host. All right. I'm going to try to share and let me know once you're able to see my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. I think we've had, this is our 5th webinar with the MEP, so we're very excited to talk about this topic that is top of mind for most executives in the supply chain space, and not only just the supply chain executives, but many CEOs, CFOs, and so on. So Lynn and I are very excited to have this conversation with you today, and hopefully you'll find it very meaningful and appropriate for your specific business. We're going to basically go through the deck, and then if you don't mind, if you could hold your questions to the end, either go ahead and type them in the chat, or you can specifically ask the question. Either way would work for us. So, and I promise we are not going to be you're not going to be in a PowerPoint purgatory this morning, although I say that and I get into my slides. So let me introduce my partner in crime, Lynn Borick. Lynn is an expert in the A&D and EMS sector. She's got tremendous background in aerospace and defense. She's worked on many very famous projects, many initiatives that keep our soldiers safe, many initiatives that send lots of important things up into orbit. And she's got a tremendous background in driving business growth in organizations, both small and large organizations, as well as M&A background. So I'm delighted that Lynn is my partner and is able to join with me in this conversation today. Me, on the other hand, I've got a little bit of background as well in aerospace and defense, high-tech, consumer goods, deep expertise in supply chain transformation specifically. And I've spent a good bit of time, I would say lately in the last, 5-6 years or so, working specifically around footprint optimization and restructuring of the supply chain. And that really is something that we're going to talk to you about today, because reshoring is not just about, moving manufacturing from one location to another, although that's what it seems like on the surface, but it does require a complete end-to-end look at your business and look at your supply chain and critical success factors, and then making a decision that is much more comprehensive than just moving product from one factory to another. So we're going to share some war stories, and we're going to share some experiences as well as some research that we've been doing on the topic. So hopefully you'll find it helpful. So without further ado, let me get into it. These are some of the clients that we work with, and we're very grateful to have some great clients and some great companies as our partners. So let's talk about reshoring. Lynn, I don't know about you, but there seems to be a new buzzword every single day that I come across reshoring, backshoring, onshoring, inshoring, nearshoring. geolocation. I can't even keep them straight. But I thought we would maybe start with, just sort of here's what it means, and here's what it means to us. So let's talk about reshoring, backshoring, and onshoring. So that is basically about transferring business operations that moved, could have been decades ago, could have been a few years ago, to overseas and back into the country of its original location. Okay. Now that doesn't necessarily mean it's just the US. It could be anywhere in the world, but it's moving back to the original location. That's what we call backshoring, onshoring, and reshoring. Inshoring is the opposite of offshoring. It's a process of moving a business operation from overseas to the local country, okay? And then nearshoring is transferring business operation to a nearby country, and it doesn't necessarily have to be your specific country. And then geolocation is the practice of conducting business according to both local and global considerations. But the fact of the matter is geolocation applies no matter what, whether inshoring, reshoring, nearshoring, outsourcing, and so on and so forth. So Lynn, do you have all those there'll be a question, there'll be a quiz later.
Yeah, I would suspect while we're on, Google is coming up with 15 more. But globalization is something that we actually have all been talking about. It just has a new word to it, and that is really understanding your both local and your global considerations and setting up the right supply chain network to support your company as well as your customers. And so they all have new names, and there's probably 15 more happening as we speak. But in reality, it really comes down to understanding your supply chain.
Yep, absolutely. So let's get started. So, it's interesting. Most people, reshoring has picked up a lot of buzz lately, but I think it actually would be appropriate for us to talk about the fact this has been going on since after the Great Recession of 2008. The administration introduced many incentives to bring manufacturing back to the US, as well as to strengthen the economy. There are many well-paying jobs that were created as a result. And there was a lot of programs that were put in place to ensure that we have skilled workforce for the future. And I think there's also lessons learned, I would say, that from offshoring. We learned that it has many advantages for large companies, but it also leads to some job loss in the US and some quality control issues. And I would say, my biggest concern was the IP loss that many of our aerospace clients have suffered as a result of offshoring. So those are all the reasons why we started to hear more and more about reshoring and bringing manufacturing back, and nearshoring, and really leveraging the both capability of within the US as well as our neighboring countries. Because one of the things that I would say that happened, and perhaps it was thought about and it just was overlooked, is the time that it added to the supply chain. And with that additional time, there's additional cost, there's additional risk and uncertainty that's associated with it. So, if you think about, well, why are we hearing more and more about it now? Well, there's many different reasons beyond, the cost piece, but there's environmental and there's renewed focus on carbon footprint. There's definitely trade wars and tariff discussions that are going on, moving to domestic production. There's definitely concern about security and not to mention our big, elephant in the room, COVID-19, that has shown us that, hey, we better rethink our supply chain. So there's all of these factors that have come into play and that are kind of coming into play to help us understand that we really need to be shortening our supply chain rather than extending our supply chain. One of the things that Lynn and I have been talking about and we're really excited about is automation and AI, and how automation and AI can really help reshoring. Because one of the reasons that we all went to other countries was to leverage the low cost in labor and low cost in manufacturing. I would say that our focus on automation and AI, specifically in robotics, is a huge, huge benefit for us as we think about reshoring. So the robotic market in 2019 was about $49 billion. And it's expected to grow to about $76 billion by 2024. That is a significant growth and that we're going to see. And we are seeing that, and with many of our clients that are specifically focusing in on robotics. And Lynn can talk a little bit about that as well. And I think that in addition to cost reduction, what we're seeing is that these robotic capabilities are helping to close the labor gap that's being created by the baby boomers retiring. So I think there's a misnomer that U.S. production costs will always be the highest. That is not the case. We venture to say that we're going to be very competitive as we implement these technologies. So Lynn, what are your thoughts on that?
So one of the things that we often overlook when we're looking at offshoring or onshoring or any of that is just the pure economic understanding of what happens when we all flock to an area. And what I mean by flock, we flocked to East Asia, we all headed off to China. And what happens is we bunch up and the overall labor rate goes up. Today in China is not low labor rate. And we all talk about that. How did that happen? Well, that happened because of a large movement of supply chain. And in reality, we need to find different ways than simple moving to the labor rates to save cost. And automation's clearly one of them. Finding places that completely support our supply chain, which you're going to hear a little bit about later on, which I call the central U.S., southern central U.S., and having a complete supply chain support. Cooperation with the universities. There in Arizona, your universities are working very, very hard to work with industry to help us with the baby boomer gap that's happening. There's a lot more than a labor rate that has to get looked at when we look at reshoring or offshoring. And I think those are the big lessons learned that we've all had. And just of recent, we got to find out what happens when we truly have our borders closed, which is what COVID-19 showed us. Yep. We haven't had that since before the Great Depression. It's been a long time since the U.S. felt that. And so now we have a better understanding of that as well to put into the mix as we analyze all of this. But all of this has to get looked at. And the exciting thing is the trend in automation is moving us closer and closer and closer to being able to have work as close as possible to where the work is being invented. And I think that's really one of the biggest changes.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk about what's on the mind of many executives. So during our research, one of the things that that popped out to me was that 45% of the respondents said, supply chain will be more, they would like the supply chain to be nearshore. So it used to be that cost was the biggest issue for most supply executives. That is no longer the case. It's not just the cost. It's about how do I create resilience in my supply chain? How do I ensure that I have some mitigation levers that I can pull? And one of those is to have closer supply chain closer to your operations, or nearshoring. We will have that. There's significant concern about having driving initiatives that provide less dependence on China. Right. And so that's another piece that we saw. What 45% of the respondents said that they were actually looking at supply chain as a way of introducing resilience. Reshoring as a way of looking at introducing resilience into their supply chain. So that, supports the thesis that this is not about cost any longer, just about cost. So one of the other things that I think is worth looking at is the factors that determine supply chain risk and how we should be thinking about headquarters and manufacturing capabilities and so on. So if you think about, and again, this is a research that we came across and it was done by original source is Bain, but I thought it was worth sharing to kind of get our perspective on this. So if you think about, the lowest risk is US, Mexico, Canada. So that is from a manufacturing location perspective, as well as supplier headquarter location. There's lots of, within the US, within the US trade bloc, if you have both the supplier and the manufacturing, that's your lowest risk. Then you've got, the medium risk category, which is what we call, China trade bloc countries. And so assess the time needed to prepare and move to alternative manufacturing and sourcing relocations. So for example, in China, you've got this whole idea of, majority stakes, minority stakes, and how does that actually play out in your manufacturing? Once you actually are in China, manufacturing in China, to reshore, to stop that and get out is a very, very difficult task. I just did that for a client, and we had to do it very mindfully and very cleverly to ensure that we didn't get stuck into a multi-year negotiation war.
Right.
Okay. So that's really important. And many companies need to keep that on top of mind, because getting out is not that quick. It's not like saying, oh, I've changed my mind, I'm out. You get tied up with lots and lots of obligations and compliance issues. And then you've got this high risk, right, for tariff and regulatory, which major suppliers and categories, where should you move, and so on. So that's something that I wanted to sort of, put this out there, that as a backdrop, as we're going to share this information, that we completely understand the risks that are associated with each one of these regions and each one of these moves. Okay. So with that said, if it's not China, where else? And it's really interesting I don't know about you, Lynn, but I've come across many, many folks that have this mindset that China's the only place I can get, synergies, cost synergies and savings and so on. And well, let us tell you, that is not the case. Okay. Nothing against China, but that is definitely not the case. We've got lots of alternatives. And so these are some of the areas that we're seeing pop up on the map. Taiwan is a strong contender. Japan, for example, South Korea, Vietnam is actually ridiculously strong in terms of a contender. So what we're trying to see is in Taiwan, there's rent assistance, there's cheap financing, there's tax breaks, and there's a simpler administration, for home-based investments. And there's a lot of focus on serving the globe in Taiwan. In Japan, you've got companies that are shifting production to Japan, and there's lots of incentives that are being provided for those companies that don't move to China or don't move elsewhere. So you're going to see a lot of, the Japanese native manufacturing trying to stay in Japan. And then you've got South Korea. South Korea's got, very, very interesting tax incentives that they're putting on the table. And also one of the things that we're seeing is they're easing regulations, which makes it easier to do business with South Korea than it was in the past. And there's a lot of financial support for returning companies to South Korea. And then the one of the very interesting scenarios that we're seeing is that 46% of US imports have shifted from China to Vietnam. So, and if there's a little bit of gaming that happens, it goes from China to Vietnam to the US. And it really, part of it is to really get around the tariffs and get around the sanctions and so on. So Vietnam has exported more than $12 billion of manufacturing goods to the US in 2019 than any other year. So we're starting to see Vietnam become a real player. So much of China's loss was Vietnam's gain, according to Patrick Van Bosch from Kearney Partners. And I would agree with that. And I would say that there's also collaboration, cooperation that's happening between China and Vietnam as well. So we shouldn't be looking at Vietnam as simply an alternative to China, but as a partner to China. And we need to keep in mind that collaboration can play out in different ways, and we should be focusing in on that. Lynn, any comments on this before we move forward in the conversation?
No, I just think that it bears to be said that East Asia, all of Asia, is an up and coming area of the whole world and has to be supported with some of our supply chain and our production. They are large consumers of our goods, as well as large consumers of supporting, investing in our various marketplaces. And so being there and being in the right place, and as Seema pointed out, understanding what it takes to get out if you have gone. The countries that you have listed here are those that fall in that category, whereas China has a much more longer lasting relationship and a lot more difficult to leave.
Yep, exactly. So let's talk about India. So India is a very attractive option. There's lots of business friendly regulations that are taking place. In fact, there's 44 if I'm remembering this correctly, 44 laws that were consolidated to 4. I mean, I remember, back in our Honeywell days, Lynn, that
Yeah.
we would have multi-year initiatives just to introduce a concept. And so what I would say is that that has really, really turned around. So I'm really excited to hear about that, because I think there's definitely more opportunity for the aerospace industry as a result. There's a booming economy with GDP growth of above 5% for the last 10 years. And I think that's going to continue, if not pick up, it's going to pick up. Tariff difference between exporting from India and the US. So for example, it could be as high as 25%. So China is, could be 25% higher than US in terms of exporting, from India, importing from India. And then you've got increased transparency and predictability as a result of Digital India. There's a huge initiative in India around not only on infrastructure, but on digital infrastructure. And what we're seeing is that is actually changing the playing field for folks who are reshoring and folks who are partnering with countries like India. It's no longer about sending your cheapest good and tell me how quickly you can build it and ship it over to me. It's really about collaborating from the very beginning, from design, from sourcing to manufacturing, and then also servicing, in-country servicing capabilities. So all of that requires that huge digital infrastructure, and we're starting to see that's happening very well in India. One of the things that I was very interested in and I thought was interesting was that we've always thought about India as having engineering talent, technical talent, and plenty of it. We're actually finding that the inexpensive labor talent and 80%, so the cost of labor in India versus China is 80% lower for that inexpensive labor. And that's really important. So I think we're going to start to see this shift on consumer goods, on electronic goods, also going, seeing that as a market as well. So, this was so I was really interested to see kind of how India is going to come to the forefront. They're expected to invest about $1.4 trillion in infrastructure to attract the business of US and many countries in the Southeast Asia, as well as from Europe. Any experience from your perspective, Lynn, on India?
Well, as you mentioned, at Honeywell, this was a major initiative, primarily, like you said, to gain access to engineering, because we were starting to feel the pressures of the bimodal populations in the engineering force, and starting to see a lot of our engineering disappearing.
Yep.
But you're right, it's shifting now into thinking of production, which was not in the forefront during those days. We never thought of actually manufacturing in India, and that's changing, primarily because of the infrastructure inside India, electrical capabilities, all of the kinds of things we take for granted in the United States, in a large way was not there to do heavy manufacturing. And that's where India's shift and India's investment in itself is really going to pay off long term. I think we're going to see a settling out of what goes to India and what does not go to India. I think what all of our call centers ran there, and they're running home. But I think the digital infrastructure was what drove that. Yeah. And I think India is going to settle out, and we're going to finally find that nice balance of what makes sense to go to India. And I think the Indian government investment is really wise here, because they're a natural choice as we all look at lower labor costs and also simplified logistics. Yep. It's not exactly easy to get from the US to around the world, and it oftentimes makes sense to have satellite production capabilities in other countries to get closer to your customer.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we're actually starting to see that with some of our clients. We have partners, that are contract manufacturers in India. And one of the things that we're starting to see is them having satellite capabilities and relationships with local manufacturers, small businesses, small manufacturers. I'm actually doing some work connecting some of the Indian contract manufacturers with the local manufacturers in Arizona to create that satellite office capability through collaboration. It doesn't always have to be that you got to put your own brick and mortars, but you can create those joint ventures and collaborations. And that seems to be a very interesting twist on how do you very quickly and rapidly get that capability up and running. So let's talk about the US, our favorite country. So, bringing it home, it's very important. So, some of the things that we're seeing is mold making, semiconductor industries, are benefiting from reshoring. There was a lot, so mold making was a huge, it's a huge, brick and mortar and capital intensive venture. And so we saw that go out very fast. And I think bringing it back is going to be very important. And it's also going to require significant focus. And we're starting to see that. Semiconductors, we're starting to see regulation that is giving incentives to semiconductor manufacturers to come back to the US. The US is focusing on bringing final assembly and tier 1 suppliers to the US. I don't think that we're going to see tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 coming back to the US very quickly. And that's okay. That's okay. We don't expect the entire supply chain to come back. But I think there's significant focus on bringing the final assembly in tier 1 and using, our next door neighbor, Mexico, as an option for us. So I also took a stab at looking at sort of just a couple of states that popped up on our research. So let's first talk about Ohio. Ohio is a hotspot. The reason for that is abundance of manufacturing workforce, as well as 3D printing. There's significant 3D printing capability in Ohio. It's ranked as number 2 in rubber output and plastic and so on. So, and there's also raw steel production. So we've known that, we've known those elements, but what we're seeing is that the state of Ohio is really putting focus on improving and being an attractive state for manufacturing capability. So we're starting to see a lot of folks who are perhaps not native to the US in terms of manufacturers looking at Ohio as a possible partner. Now, that also caused me to look at Arizona, talking with the MEP and the work that we are doing with the governor's office on helping to understand how do we make Arizona more attractive for manufacturers. There are a few things that came to pop up. So we're benefiting from, we're a great option because we are so close to Mexico, so close to Canada. So for us to be that hub for organizations is really, our location itself is very beneficial for companies. We have favoring regulation that attract facility relocation opportunities, although I think that probably needs a little bit more power behind it. And that's a feedback that we're going to be giving to the governor, saying that we need to make it more attractive. We've seen that there's been pivoting to production of PPE and other medical devices. So what that says is, hey, we have this capability for being a resilient option in your resilient supply chain. So let's look at Arizona. There's funding that's provided by the CARES Act grant for local manufacturers and for manufacturers coming in. So I'm really looking forward to working with the governor's office to give them that feedback that says, how do we now become a hotspot as Ohio is and as some of the other states are? How do we become that hotspot? One of the areas we're working on is as you mentioned, that many of our local universities and colleges is working on improving the workforce capability. So that's also another focus for Arizona. Mexico, goes without saying, it's nearshoring option. The labor costs in Mexico are still 40 to 80% less than the US. And they're growing, they're catching up, but we still have opportunity to take advantage of that labor cost savings. And also the trick is, how do you keep final assembly in the US, but use Mexico as the nearshoring option? And that's what we're starting to see, that model is taking hold as we had expected. Okay. Any comments, Lynn?
Yeah, I want to mention a couple of other areas that are, for those of you in Arizona, you already know this because they're your sister states that you're working with in aerospace. And that is, we have a huge uptick in Kentucky right now. We have Raytheon and GE and Lockheed flocking there. And that has to do, again, with everything we just talked about. lower electrical rates. The states are giving them incentives and supports and taxes. And there's a heavy manufacturing logistics setup, and the state's very focused on that, along with the fact that there is commodities available, readily available, like aluminum. When we're in aerospace, that's critical. And having that close by is also critical. And then just the same thing we say over and over and over again, the affiliation with the colleges and access to strong engineering talent. So if you look at Kentucky and Alabama and Oklahoma, all of you in Arizona that are in aerospace, those are your sister states you're working very closely with. And then we're seeing Florida incentivize like crazy. We see, you know, the Kennedy Space Center area, the Hollywood area, which is the Orlando area, and you know, north of Tampa, building up like crazy for aerospace. Again, lower cost labor, access to labor, access to logistics. And then of course, like Ohio, Michigan is building out very rapidly because we're taking advantage of the automotive supply base that was always there. And it's readily transferable to everything that we do. And so those are, you know, we all know about North Carolina because we watched Airbus and Boeing go there as well. But I think there's a hub that's happening around them. And I think Arizona is very much a part of that network of aerospace supply chain. And I think embracing that and embracing the cooperation between the universities, which Arizona is doing, is going to do nothing but grow the aerospace industry within Arizona.
Yeah, very true. So are we done with China? Absolutely not. It's almost in the short run, it's almost impossible to cut off ties with China. You know, I find it comical because I think general public, there's such an anti-China sentiment that you see sort of like, well, we're done with China. We're no longer going to do business with China. I'm sorry to say that, no, that is not the case. Alternatives to China are still maturing, as we talked about some of the alternatives. Manufacturers are looking to add more locations and not necessarily abandon China. It's how do you offset the risk? Okay, not to say that China's off the table. It's how do you not have all your eggs in the China basket, right? And then one of the other things that's really helped China is they're back to work. The central government was aggressive and back to work campaigns. And so they've basically said, hey, we're producing, we're going on while the rest of the world is still struggling with the lockdowns, right? So that gives them that opportunity to say, we're not out of the game. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of put that out there for all my friends who think that, you know, China's a has-been. No, 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 no. So let's talk about how do we now as a company, how do our clients think about relocation, reshoring, and how do you make those decisions? Because it's not easy. It's not something that you wake up one day and say, well, I'm done with China. I'm upset with them. So I'm going to move everything to Mexico. I'm going to move everything to the US and so on. It's not that easy. It actually takes a methodical approach. And so I wanted to just take a minute and share with you the approach that we use with our clients to help them think through this option, right? So first is diagnose. Look at the organizational capability. Look at your needs based on post-COVID. I can't tell you to stress that enough. COVID was a wake-up call for all of us in the supply chain to help us really understand what's important in our supply chain and where we have opportunities to improve, not only just from a cost perspective, but more importantly, from a resilience perspective. Design the end-to-end network. Reimagine how you will deal with your customers. Reimagine how will you deal with your suppliers. Reimagine how will you provide service in the future. And please address the weakest link in your global supply chain. Address the IP issues. Add the should cost perspective on this. That's going to help you understand what the design of your supply chain should look like. So once you have that design, then what we tell our clients is, well, let's deconstruct it. It kind of seems counterintuitive, but it's very important because you can't get that design and get it implemented in one big bang, okay? You have to deconstruct it and devise those sprints based on capabilities and value, and you have to prioritize based on flow. So many of our clients will say, I want to work on a business unit by business unit perspective. And that's okay. Whatever makes sense. Sometimes they'll say, I want to take this one location and I know it serves multiple business units and it's going to just be disruptive to my customers because some of them will be dealing with this factory, the others will be this factory. There's no right or wrong answer, but you have to make sure that you prioritize based on a flow, and you have to make sure you address that as you are deconstructing your plan, and then deploy it based on a process. That's really important, because you want to make sure that your processes that you're bringing back or you're bringing to another region, you're moving around, that they don't break the end user capability that's expected. So process, technology, policy decisions all have to be taken into account. And what's really important is make sure that you have the markers, clear markers of success. And that is really, really critical. So when we use this method to work with our clients, and we work this with them or on their behalf, that having that buy-in, understanding the ROI, both from a design perspective, and then how you deconstruct that ROI, and then how do you deploy that ROI is very, very important. And my final thoughts on this, please anticipate pain. If anybody comes and says to you that I'm going to make this reshoring experience painless for you, please check their credentials. Not painless. It is not painless. In fact, if it's painless, then you haven't thought it through. You haven't been vigorous in your approach. So you want to make sure that whoever is working with you on the reshoring plan is anticipating pain, because that pain is very real. It comes from the country that you may be leaving, to the country that you may be entering, to the organizations that you're leaving, to the lack of experience or capability that your supplier may have. Pain doesn't mean it can't be done. Pain just means that you're mitigating risk and you're addressing that in your plan. Okay, Lynn, any final thoughts on this before we go to the next topic?
Just a couple. Underlying all of this is your infrastructure and your data infrastructure. The pain that you're going to feel is absolutely real, but being able to move business from one to another location is really what's critical, and being able to understand how to do that and how to do that rapidly. And then understanding where the pain points are, where you can augment using other areas in your network. And then I guess the one last comment is, this is not for the faint of heart. There will absolutely be pain, but also indecision is probably the biggest disruptor of this going well. Once you've made the decision, you have to be all in, and you have to move, and you have to move rapidly. I have watched more companies take a really good design for their supply chain network and struggle to make the decision, struggle to make sure the decision is widely held within their organization, and they actually implode on themselves trying to do this and end up losing major customers just to indecision. This is, like I said, not for the faint of heart, but once you go, you got to go.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the areas for A&D, customers out there is very important is sometimes these types of changes will trigger a recall. The recalls are expensive. Recalls are painful. Recalls are not easy to navigate, and they cause a huge disruption. So in your design phase, make sure that you're accounting for recalls. Make sure you're going through those customer contracts and obligations to understand where you might have recalls triggered. Okay. So let's talk about how you select a center of excellence. Okay. It's, you could roll the dice, and many companies do. In fact, many companies did when they outsourced, right? Everybody's going to China, so I should go to China too. Well, no, not quite. So you have to think about the strategic locations that are popping up. They're in the US, they're in the Southeast Asia, and they're in Eastern Europe. Okay, those are the most mature ones. Criteria must include the ability to consistently achieve quality and service goals. Okay, obviously don't lose sight of the cost and capability advantages, but make sure that you're keeping service and disruption and lack of disruption top of mind. Cost advantages should include both direct and indirect labor. Okay, most people think about direct labor and they sort of forget the indirect labor. I have a client that moved lots of materials around only to find out oh, wait a minute, a lot of my products require a high degree of technical know-how and engineering resources, and the location that I have moved them to doesn't have abundance of those resources. So think about that, and that's an issue. Labor, tax, freight, all of those are things that you need to be thinking about. Understand the access to local market for sourcing and customers. Too often people think about the local market for customers, but not for sourcing. And that causes so much pain in the supply chain. So make sure that sourcing capability, sourcing availability is thought about. And then also, address the issue of proximity to R&D and supply base of critical materials and end user service requirements. So those are all the things you're going to be thinking about in step 2, which is your design phase, and and step 1 in your diagnostic phase. Okay. So let's talk about COE trends. Aerospace, mine and Lynn's favorite industry. Lots of impact from COVID, right? From spare parts to supply for AOG. I mean, we've seen lots of impact in terms of availability, in terms of the market completely shifting. What's needed for the next 4 or 5 years in this marketplace. I think we've said in our last webinar that we did, or 2 webinars ago, it might actually take a decade for us to get back to where we were. But that doesn't mean it's a lost cause, but that just means you have this added layer of complexity. Carriers are returning to leased engines, removing supply chain from OEM to OEM home territories. And those home territories may or may not be ready, and they may need more focus to get them ready. There's a significant focus on non-disruptive supply chain. But you also have to remember that the new COE has to have the ability to handle complex development and production. It's not like you're making toys and you can send them to any region that can do plastic assembly. That's not the case. This is very, very complex development and production process. You need to think about having co-location of OEM engineering, production to support OEM customers, because there's offsets, and ITAR restrictions. That makes it very complex to select a COE. The areas that we're starting to see that pop up are as good options are obviously the US, Mexico, Vietnam, and Philippines. Okay. Since you're an aerospace guru, Lynn, I'll give you a minute to give your comments on this before we go to the next industry.
Well, I would say the biggest thing that we're hearing, the big guns, Raytheon, Lockheed, Boeing, all talk about is partnership in their supply chain. And what they really mean about that is having the development taking place real time, same time as the design is happening within the production lines at their suppliers, which means they need to be closely located. We've got Boeing even looking at bringing suppliers into their own facilities to get them closer located. This is because of very, very complex designs. As everybody knows that the tolerances are tight on all of our designs, and they tend to creep during production. So engineers have to be on our production lines, and having them strewn basically all over the United States is driving cost up significantly to these OEMs. And then to Seema's point, IP. They want to protect their IP. They want to have you protect your IP, and they want to understand how you're going to do that, because having engineers in the production facilities creates a possibility of leakage, severe leakage. So it's a very complex problem, all of which is, I know Raytheon is outsourcing and beginning to stop manufacturing a great deal of what they traditionally manufactured, and they're living that complexity right now. And it is very complex. It has to be very carefully thought through.
Yep, absolutely. Let's talk about pharma and medical. So over the past decade, China has been the largest source of our medical imports for the United States. India and Mexico were the second and third position. Well, COVID showed us that we can't have that scenario moving forward. But we also know to do a transition in this industry, it can take up to 2 years. And if it's China, it can take longer than 2 years. So there's going to be a lot of co-production options that we're going to have to be thinking about. So these centers of excellence are not going to be an alternative to China, rather co-production to China. So you may always see, you're always going to see that we're going to have to stay in China to some extent, just because moving out is so difficult. But we're starting to see that US and China will remain, Canada, South Korea, Japan, Australia, UK, Germany, and Switzerland are popping up as having the capability, having the ability and the interest to be the centers of excellence for pharma and medical community. We're also seeing this trend that many aerospace, traditionally aerospace heavy manufacturers are now able to take on more of the pharma and medical, I would say probably medical devices manufacturing. And that's a great way to diversify. That's a great way to diversify risk, but it's also because they both understand they're highly regulated industries, and those manufacturers have capability to be able to do business in that domain. So we're really encouraging many of our clients as a growth strategy to be thinking about that combination. Okay. And then the last but not the least industry that we looked at was commercial electronics. So there's, highly global supply chains across different regions. This isn't something that's happened, this has happened for a long time, over a long period of time. But one of the interesting models that we're seeing is that companies are shifting from this B2C model, shifting to B2C from the B2B model. So they're really kind of cutting out the middleman. And in that industry, you can. And so large firms like Intel, Sharp, Google's, they plan to diversify and use, Vietnam as an option, for example. Many of the manufacturing companies are moving to India to access all the engineering talent and also take advantage of the low labor that's still low cost. So the centers of excellence for commercial electronics will be China, India, Canada, Mexico, Morocco for all places, Malaysia, Vietnam, Poland, and South Korea. So I'd like to go to Morocco. That'd be interesting. So,
I think that's what keeps it growing.
Exactly. So we look forward to having a client in Morocco soon. That really kind of brings our presentation to a conclusion this morning. So we want to save some time to take questions, but I just wanted to kind of leave you with this one last thought, which is, regardless of what strategy you choose, regardless of what COE you choose, but make sure that you review purchase and supply contracts for force majeure rights and obligations. Those tend to be very different and I would say quite difficult in many regions. And we in the US are used to certain protections and certain rights and obligations that may or may not be available in some of these other regions around the globe. So that would be something to really keep in mind as you think about that. We used a lot of different sources to collect our research. So with that, Lynn and I are open to taking any questions that you might have. So why don't you help us out, Jim, and let us know where we have questions.
Okay, first, it was asked if these slides are going to be available after the program, if you're open to sending those out.
Yes, we are. That's not a problem at all.
And then also to let everybody know that this is being recorded. So Sarah from our office will send you a link to the recording that you can review again or pass on to your colleagues. So the first question that I have here, and you may have touched on this in the trends, but it came in a little earlier. What do you think is the main driver for supply chain reshoring? So in summary.
I can take a first stab at this. I think there's, it's difficult to say one specific trend. I think that there are many reasons that we do reshoring. Like we said, discussion around the idea of having more risk-averse supply chain, making sure that we've got better quality, making sure that we're not just fixated on cost alone, and we're shortening the cycle time for that supply chain. Those are all the different pieces that I think are the reason for reshoring.
Okay, the next one.
I think there's another critical one that we need to address that we maybe haven't yet, and that is security. Security of all of our electronics is becoming paramount. This last go around with solar winds has woken everybody up. Of course, the world says it's Russia. I would bet it's China. I would bet money we'll find out shortly it is. And there is the other main driver on electronics out of China is really that. And so we need to, I mean, Seema is right, it's very complex, but I think that of late has become foremost in our minds.
I think,
Okay.
you know, I think it's honestly, at the end of the day, it's about us taking control of our destiny.
Control. Exactly.
You know, the way I look at it is that it's about time.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, the next one we have, how will the incoming administration, or how the incoming administration will handle the tariffs that were imposed by the current administration?
Lynn, you want to take that?
Yeah, it's my favorite one because it comes up constantly. That I think the real answer is it will be balanced, and it'll be quite a while before we see the tariffs go away. Biden is caught in a traffic jam, just very much similar to what Trump found himself in. They're backed by labor unions that want job protection in the United States and lower costs and more human rights and all of the pressure that's on that. But that's balanced by the pressure from the farmers and the U.S. corporations wanting to see the tariffs go away. And so honestly, I think he's already said he's going to take a wait and see attitude. I think everyone around him believes that the tariffs that are in place under Trump are probably going to stay there for quite some time.
Okay. Thank you, Len.
Mm-hmm.
Within aerospace, do you see any trends between electronic companies and versus mechanical?
So, you know, it's interesting. We've always seen sort of these pockets of excellence. So mechanical, there tends to be, you know, Mexico tends to be a good region for the mechanical work. For electrical, there tends to be, you know, more on the Eastern European side, as well as India for the electronics piece. So I think within that space, I don't think that's going to change very much, because it's not like one day you're doing electrical and all of a sudden you become a center of excellence for mechanical, right? There's a reason for that, because of your core competency in those particular capabilities. So I don't think that there's necessarily any shift in that. I just think that we're going to see more concentration of movement in those already existing regions.
Yep.
What about you?
I totally agree with that. And then we also need to remember that the mechanical locations where we currently are at are very, very difficult to move. That is not something that you can just pick up and move overnight. And a lot of industries, a lot of aerospace industries have found themselves not being able to leave their mechanical sites because of environmental issues. And so it is, the electronics can move much quicker and deal with opportunities much quicker than the manufacturing or the heavy mechanical. And then the other thing is heavy mechanical needs to be as close as possible to its commodities.
Yes.
So they're going to be probably remain pretty much where they're at.
Yeah, they're more capital intensive as well. So it's
very capital intensive. Yeah.
Not an overnight move or decision.
Yeah.
Okay, and the last question I have here, unless somebody chimes in at the last minute, and this one's a bit general, but when will supply chains restore?
I think, you know, supply chain restoration goes hand in hand with reshoring, right? I would say that reshoring is a way of restoring your supply chain. I think that along with other initiatives that one drives to do that. But I think the question might be better answered to say, when will reshoring be complete? And then the answer is, I think it's going to take quite some time. It's always going to be in play. Frankly, it's kind of like building, you know, it's kind of like painting a bridge. Once you get to the other side, it's time to go start back on the, you know, from the beginning again. And the reason for that is because we're not a static environment. We're not a static business environment. We are an economy that's constantly moving and morphing and changing. And so we're always going to have dynamics at play that are going to cause us to look at this. So when Lynn and I work with our clients on developing a reshoring strategy, you know, it's something that's an annual activity that you relook at. You may not make any changes to the plan because reshoring the action plan might take longer, but it is something you look at on an annual basis as part of your AOP process and say, are there changes? Are there any shifts that I need to make as a result? It's part of your sourcing strategy and your overall footprint consolidation approach.
Yeah, I would add to that focusing down on your weakest link right now and bringing your supply chain back up is probably far more important than the reshore. And you can, if you have a reshore strategy, you can make that dealing with those weakest links a step in your reshoring. Most of us have significant weak links in our supply chain and people inability to meet the demand and the requirements that we have. And we also have, I know in aerospace, we have older designs that have to be dealt with that are actually the biggest culprits in our ability to deliver, both in quality and delivering on time. And focusing on those and melding those into your reshoring strategy is really where I know aerospace needs to be right now. And so restoring your supply chain right now, SEMA hit on it. It's stay the course, go slow, be thoughtful, and fix those weakest links, because that's what's causing you to not get back on track after COVID. Once you're back on track, then test that reshoring and outsourcing supply chain strategy literally every quarter and see what's shifted. What's shifted is your market mix, your customers. Listen to your customers' strategy, try to understand them long-term, and set up a network that is as stable as you can get so that you can concentrate down into the supply chain and make it healthy. And I think that would be my closing advice on restoring your supply chain.
Okay, thank you, Seema and Len, for presenting this today. We really appreciate the inputs that you have. And to all of our attendees and to you, Seema and Len, I hope you guys have a happy and safe holiday season. And we look forward to a much stronger 2021.
Absolutely. Take care. Thank you very much.
You too, Jim.
Have a
Take
great
care.
day.
Bye-bye.
All righty. Bye-bye.